of junk.
Welcome to this edition of Trash Compactor. In this episode I'll be making a couple of vintage style Walrus Men. For this build I'm going to be using a Power of the Force Walrus Man and also a Bespin Han. So my Bespin Han is a bit of a beater, very loose limbs, there's quite a serious bit of rub, there is a bit of damage to the figure. And the Power of the Force Walrus Man is one where I use the jacket for my custom Ceremony Luke project. First thing I need to do is to pop and boil the heads, pop them in hot water, pop the heads off. As you can see here, my Han head broke off, but I'm not going to need the head, and I've got many Han heads from previous projects. So the Power of the Force Walrus Man head has got quite a large peg, and what I need to do is slightly drill out the body of the Han as well as trimming the peg on the Power of the Force Walrus Man head. So I'm basically trimming it off just to make it slightly pointed and jagged so it'll fit into the head more easily. So eventually I've got the head in, so I've made the hole in the Han body a little bit bigger. The head does sit quite high on the body, so what I'm going to do in my Dremel is just actually level off the top of Han's neck to be more level with the shoulders, so when the head actually goes on it sits a little bit lower on the body and isn't as high as it is, so it just gives it a little bit more of a natural look. There is a bit of a ridge at the back of the Walrus Man head, and I will trim that off later and then paint that. So what I'm doing now is just with the Dremel is just going around and neatening up the peg just so it sits better in the actual figure and more flush to the shoulders. So the head goes in now and it does sit better on the body. There is still a ridge at the back. So I'm now taking the ridge off the back of the head just to smooth it down so it doesn't look as if it's hanging over the back. Just doing this in my Dremel. You could use your Stanley knife. I just thought using my Dremel would give more rough effect that looked more like hair. Of course the plastic does feather, so you just need to trim it off a little bit with your Stanley knife. As you can see, when the head goes on it does actually sit now at the back a little bit more flush and doesn't hang over the back as much. So in a comparison, there's the original Walrus Man, so you can sort of see the difference between the two. The reason why I'm using these figures is neither of them stand very well. They're very loose, a lot of rub. Don't use good quality figures, just as a reminder, because it's very frustrating. You use beta ones that are not really fit for display or need a lot of work doing to them. So one thing about Walrus Man that is unique to the character is his hands. He doesn't really have proper hands. There's been lots of different edits in all the different films where Obi-Wan's sliced off his arm. And in one shot it'd be a hairy fingered hand, in another shot, another version, it's a cupped sort of hoof. In the original film the arm that was cut off was the hoof. There's a photo that shows that it was the Walrus Man hand, but for some reason, even though it's Dr. Evazan that is the one that confronts Luke and draws his blaster, Walrus Man Ponderbaba's arm that gets cut off. So that's always been a bit confusing for me, especially the only person who's ever really addressed this. I think it was the Adiwan edit where he actually shows the correct arm cut off the correct person in his edit. However, I believe that his hand is meant to be almost like the cupped version. So what I'm going to do is use Milli Putty to create that effect over the hands but still keep the thumbs intact, so the new Walrus Man can still hold a weapon. So follow your Milli Putty instructions, mix it as it says on the box. Then all I'm doing is, from my little ball, is just cutting a few pieces off just to try to work out the amount I need. Again, not a great deal is needed. But once you apply it to the hand, you can take it off, take the excess off. So I start to apply the Milli Putty to the back of the hands, trimming off the excess just to make them look a bit more equal. smoothing them out, shaping them around the fingers, but again trying not to fill where the thumbs are, because I do want the figure to still hold the weapon. Then just using some moulding tools to just clear out the milli putty from underneath the thumbs. There you can see his hands have now got the milli putty on. So I'm going to leave that to dry, and we'll come back to that in a couple of hours. So there we go, my Walrus Man's had some time to dry. There's his hands. Before I did leave them to dry, I did just give them a smooth over with a little bit of water just to smooth the milli putty so it wasn't so rough. You can do that, or at the end you can just use some soft sandpaper and give it a little bit of a smooth down, but mine's generally quite smooth. So now the hands are dry, the next thing to do is to paint my figure. I'm going to be using this buff yellow, which is ideal for his shirt. And he can be quite liberal with the paint because we've got to paint the jacket on and also the trousers, so if you go over the edges it's no big deal. Next thing I'm going to be doing is his trousers, and for that I'm just going to be using a chocolate brown, and again be quite liberal with the paint. And while the shirt's drying, that can also now be drying as well, so they're both drying off together. So I've come back to that now it's dried. Next thing to focus on is the jacket, and I'm just going to be using this bright orange. It's sort of an orange red. It's the colour I use for painting my X-Wing pilots, so it's a good orange. Its coverage isn't great, so I'm going to do a coat, leave that to dry, and then go back to it once it's dried off, because as you can see, first coat doesn't really like dark colours underneath. So we'll go back to that later on. In the meantime, using a dark grey, I'm just going to paint his hands and the back of his head. That's had some time to dry. I can now give the jacket another coat. Don't know what it is about the orange, it does not do good coverage. So it's had some time to dry off. Just make sure you can still move the arms. Remember, if they're a bit loose, you can use your liquid poly to tighten the joints. These are doing okay. The only thing is, as you do put multiple coats on, you do twist the arms. Sometimes the paint does powder. Once it's dry, just get a nice stiff brush and give that a good brush throughout the joints, and it will get rid of the excess, and then you can paint another coat. So I'm doing a few touch-ups on the trousers, just on areas where my fingers have got a bit messy, and then the next thing I need to do, of course, while this is all drying off, I'm going to touch up the boots. So using a nice gloss black, give them a coat. And usually I tend to find that you have to do 2 coats, and then I'll leave it to dry, come back to it later and do another. So I've done his boots, so I'll give him some time to dry off, see if he needs another coat later. I do find that sometimes with this paint you're best to leave it 24 hours to allow it to dry, for it to become hardened and permanent. It does dry off very, very quickly, but it still can be quite soft and come off the figure. There we go, he's dried off. So for the back of his head, I painted that earlier with a little bit of grey just to darken it down, and now I'm going to use a matte black just to blend it in to go with almost like his beard, and also to touch up his eyes with a little bit of gloss so a little bit more shiny. So that's him done. I think he'll agree, quite effective. So I'm just going to put him to the back and leave him to dry for 24 hours. So during this process, because I had 3 Walrus Men, I started painting, just doing a paint job on an original vintage Walrus Man in addition, as I wanted to have my original with the orange and blue, and then a more colour accurate version, which how Kenner were originally going to sell this figure. And in the concept drawings they were going to do orange arms, orange body, brown legs. But for some reason, I think due to speed and the time of getting them out, they just used blue arms, dipped the hands, didn't bother touching up the bits on the legs or painting it brown. So the idea of this is to do a more Palitoy, Kenner, colour accurate Walrus Man based on their original concept. This is super easy, very effective, and I think when you have the 3 Walrus Men all together, look really good. So that took a couple of coats of the orange to go on, looks quite good. Touch up his boots slash feet. Kenna loved making boots look like actual feet. And then I just leave him to dry off. So there we go. There's my 3 Walrus Men, my vintage, my Power of the Force custom with the Best-Man hand body, and then the original just painted. So I think it's been quite successful. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more in the future or suggest some potential future makes, please subscribe.
What a piece of junk!